Every day, aircraft carry mountains of tiny plastic packages out of China. Inside are dresses cheaper than lunch, shoes priced like cups of coffee, and trends that may not have existed 2 weeks earlier. This is not just fast fashion. It is a machine that watches what millions of people click, tests thousands of products, and tells factories what to make, almost in real time. By 2024, the company behind that machine was generating roughly $37 billion in annual revenue. But the secret behind Shein's success also created its greatest vulnerability. Because what happens when a clothing company moves faster than the laws, factories, and people surrounding it can handle? For most of modern retail history, fashion was a guessing game. A brand tried to predict what people would want months in advance. Designers created a seasonal collection. Factories produced thousands of identical garments. Ships carried them across the world. Then, stores waited. If customers loved the collection, the company made money. If they did not, racks filled with unsold clothes. Prices were cut, margins disappeared, inventory was dumped, destroyed, or left inside warehouses. The problem was not making clothes. The problem was knowing which clothes to make. Zara had already transformed this system. Instead of designing collections a year ahead, it shortened the cycle. Store managers reported what customers were buying. The company reacted quickly and refreshed its stores constantly. Fashion became faster, but it was still built around physical locations, regional warehouses, and relatively large production runs. Then, an entrepreneur named Xu Yangtian, widely known as Chris Xu, approached the industry from a completely different direction. Details about Shein's earliest years are unusually murky. Accounts differ over precisely when the current business began. Shein's own materials commonly date its establishment to 2012, while outside histories trace predecessor operations to 2008. What is clearer is Xu's background. He was associated with search engine optimization, the art of discovering what people search for online and positioning products in front of them. He was not approaching fashion primarily as a designer. He was approaching it as a data problem. Early versions of the business reportedly focused on products such as wedding dresses sold to customers outside China. That market offered an important lesson. A company did not need stores in London, Los Angeles, or Paris to reach Western shoppers. It needed search traffic. It needed competitive prices. And it needed a supply chain capable of turning attention into products. China already had enormous garment manufacturing capacity. Around Guangzhou, countless workshops could cut, sew, and package clothing. But these factories were fragmented. Many were small. Traditional brands often treated that fragmentation as a problem. Shein would turn it into an advantage. The company began connecting suppliers through software. Orders, designs, sales information, inventory, and production schedules could move through a digital system. Instead of behaving like a conventional clothing company, Shein began behaving like a technology platform sitting on top of a manufacturing network. And that distinction changed everything. Imagine Shein identifies a possible trend. Perhaps searches for a particular dress are rising. A similar design is gaining attention on social media. Customers are clicking a new color. A conventional retailer might order thousands of units and hope the trend survives. Shein does something more cautious. It launches the product in a tiny batch. According to the company, a new item commonly begins with only 100 to 200 pieces. Then the test begins. Do customers click? Do they save the item? Do they place it in their carts? Do they buy it? Do they return it? If the signals are weak, production can stop before the company is buried under unsold inventory. But if the signals are strong, Shein orders more. Fast. A risky fashion prediction becomes a sequence of small experiments. The company calls this its on-demand model. The concept sounds simple, but it requires extraordinary coordination. Factories must accept small initial orders. Suppliers must respond quickly. Software must pass information through the network. Designs must become samples. Samples must become listings. Successful listings must become larger production runs before the term disappears. This is the first engine of Shein's business model. Reduce the cost of being wrong. Traditional fashion tries to predict demand. Shein tests demand. That difference allows it to offer a staggering number of choices. Investigations found that, during periods of its explosive growth, Shein was adding thousands of new styles to its app in a single day. Not every product needed to become a hit. Most could disappear quietly. The winners would receive more production and more visibility. It was the logic of social media applied to clothing. Post constantly, measure everything, amplify what works, kill what does not. But supply was only half of the machine. Shein also transformed the experience of shopping. Open the app and it rarely feels like walking through a department store. It feels like entering an endless feed. Products are personalized. Discounts appear. Countdowns create urgency. Points reward repeated visits. Games and check-ins encourage users to return. New items never seem to stop arriving. Shopping becomes entertainment. The app learns what holds your attention. Then it shows you more of it. A person who pauses on black evening dresses receives more black evening dresses. Another shopper sees phone cases, cosmetics, or home accessories. The store changes for every customer. And because many products are extraordinarily cheap, hesitation becomes easier to overcome. A shopper may carefully consider a $200 coat. A $7 top feels different. The decision is smaller. The cart grows faster. This creates Shein's second engine. Turn browsing into a habit. Then came the hauls. Influencers opened enormous packages on camera. One item after another appeared. A dress, a jacket, shoes, accessories. The quantity itself became the spectacle. Viewers were not simply watching fashion, they were watching abundance. Shein worked extensively with influencers and micro-influencers who could reach specific communities at a fraction of the cost of traditional celebrity campaigns. The arrangement formed a powerful loop. Influencers created demand, demand produced data, data guided production. Cheap production enabled larger hauls. Larger hauls generated more content. Then the cycle began again. During the pandemic, the machine accelerated. Physical stores closed. Consumers moved online. People spent more time on social platforms. Shein did not need to wait for shoppers to return to malls. It was already living inside their phones. In May 2021, app tracking firms reported that Shein overtook Amazon in the shopping category of major United States app stores. That moment revealed something bigger. This mysterious fashion platform had not merely beaten other clothing apps. For a time, it had outranked the defining e-commerce company of the age. And Shein had another structural advantage. It sold internationally from a tightly connected supply base, without maintaining the same global store network as older competitors. No prime shopping streets, no thousands of permanent retail locations, far less money trapped in store leases and displays. Pop-up shops could create excitement without becoming the center of the business. Meanwhile, many low-value packages entering the United States qualified for a customs rule known as de minimis. For years, eligible shipments valued at no more than $800 could enter duty-free with simplified processing. Because individual Shein orders were usually worth far less, direct-to-consumer shipping fit neatly inside the rule. A 2023 congressional investigation estimated that Shein and Temu together were likely responsible for more than 30% of packages entering the United States under de minimis. This did not mean the shipments were illegal. Shein said it complied with applicable customs laws. But it did mean the system gave direct shipping platforms an advantage that traditional retailers importing commercial inventory did not enjoy in the same way. Shein's price was not created by one miracle. It was created by a stack of advantages. Small production tests, low inventory risk, a flexible supplier network, no large permanent store empire, data-driven marketing, direct distribution, and, in important markets, favorable treatment for low-value parcels. Put those pieces together, and fashion no longer had to move at Zara's speed. It could move at internet speed. But the machine contained a contradiction. Shein argued that small batches reduce overproduction. That claim has logic. Producing 100 test units can create less unwanted inventory than gambling on 10,000. But Shein was not simply making smaller batches. It was testing an immense volume of designs and encouraging consumers to return constantly. Efficiency per experiment could coexist with more experiments, more purchases, and more consumption overall. The same system that reduced Shein's risk made it possible to flood the screen with novelty. And novelty required speed. Factories had to respond. Designers had to produce, workers had to sew, products had to ship before attention moved elsewhere. The first warning was hiding inside the company's greatest strength. The faster the feedback loop became, the more pressure it placed on everything connected to it. In 2021, the Swiss organization Public Eye reported serious conditions at several Shein suppliers it investigated around Guangzhou. Workers interviewed by the organization described extremely long schedules, around 75 hours per week in some cases. Public Eye returned for a follow-up investigation based on interviews conducted in 2023. It reported that excessive hours remained common at the factories it examined. This was not a comprehensive audit of every Shein supplier, but it raised a disturbing question. If ultra-fast production depends on an entire network responding immediately, who absorbs the pressure when the algorithm demands more? Shein said excessive working hours were a long-standing industry challenge and stated that suppliers must follow its code of conduct. The company says that code prohibits forced labor, child labor, wage abuses, and working hour violations. It has also increased audits, training, and compliance spending. Yet Shein's own 2023 sustainability report disclosed that audits had identified 2 child labor cases during that year. The company said it suspended orders from the affected suppliers, required remediation, and strengthened its policy. The disclosure demonstrated that monitoring could uncover violations. It also demonstrated that violations existed inside the network. Then came the allegations that reached beyond working hours. United States lawmakers questioned whether products sold through Shein's supply chain could be connected to forced labor in China's Xinjiang region. The United States prohibits imports made wholly or partly with forced labor, with particular legal scrutiny applied to goods connected to Xinjiang. Shein has repeatedly said it has zero tolerance for forced labor and requires contract manufacturers to source cotton only from approved regions. But lawmakers argued that the enormous number of small packages and limited customs visibility made enforcement difficult. The cheap parcel had become more than a shopping bargain. It had become a regulatory blind spot. And there was another problem. When a company tests vast numbers of designs at extraordinary speed, where do those designs come from? Independent artists and major brands accused Shein of selling products that copied protected artwork or designs. Some disputes led to settlements, others became lawsuits. In one 2023 complaint, 3 artists accused Shein entities of copyright infringement and racketeering. Those were allegations in civil litigation, not established findings that the company was guilty of racketeering. Shein has said it respects intellectual property rights, removes infringing products when substantiated, and has invested in detection technology. But the complaints kept revealing the same tension. At Shein's scale, even a small failure rate could affect many creators. The system was optimized to discover what people wanted. It was less clear whether it could always determine who originally created it. This is where a conventional business documentary would announce the collapse. But Shein did not collapse. That is what makes this story more important. The controversies grew, the business kept growing. Consumers criticized the company and continued opening the app. Governments investigated it while packages continued arriving. Shein became a test of how far consumer behavior can separate price from principle. For millions of customers, the decision was not philosophical, it was financial. Sustainable clothing can cost more. Traditional brands can cost more. A shopper with a limited budget may not experience a $5 shirt as disposable excess. They may experience it as access. Shein understood that tension perfectly. Critics saw overconsumption. Customers saw choice. Critics saw a relentless algorithm. Customers saw clothing they could afford. Both could be true at once. But the pressure was moving from public opinion into law. In the United States, lawmakers focused on de minimis shipments and forced labor enforcement. The rule that had helped direct-to-consumer platforms scale became politically difficult to defend. Then, on May 2nd, 2025, the United States ended duty-free de minimis treatment for products from China and Hong Kong. The precise tariff regime changed amid wider trade negotiations, but the essential shift was clear. The tiny package was no longer automatically duty-free. One pillar beneath the model had moved. Shein could respond in several ways: raise prices, absorb part of the cost, ship more inventory in bulk, expand local warehousing, move or diversify production, or accept lower margins. But every solution reduced one of the qualities that made the original model so powerful. Bulk importing could improve shipping economics, but it required predicting demand earlier. Local inventory could speed delivery, but it increased inventory risk. Moving production could reduce exposure to China-specific trade action, but rebuilding a highly coordinated supplier network would take time. The model could adapt. It just could not adapt for free. Europe applied pressure from another direction. In 2024, the European Commission designated Shein a very large online platform under the Digital Services Act, subjecting it to stricter obligations. In 2025, European consumer authorities alleged that the platform used practices including misleading discounts, pressure selling, and inadequate information about consumer rights. Shein was given an opportunity to respond and propose corrective measures. Then, in February 2026, the European Commission opened formal proceedings examining suspected failures involving illegal products, transparency around recommendation systems, and allegedly addictive design features. Opening proceedings is not a finding of guilt. But notice what regulators were now investigating: not only the products, the mechanism, the countdowns, the rewards, the recommendations, the endless reason to come back. The features that help transform shopping into entertainment had become a legal risk. Shein's expansion into a broader marketplace added another layer of danger. Selling products from third-party merchants could expand selection far beyond clothing. But the more sellers and categories a marketplace contains, the harder it becomes to ensure that every listing is safe, legal, and accurately described. Scale creates opportunity. Scale also multiplies every mistake. Then there was the public market problem. For years, Shein pursued a major stock market listing. A listing would give investors a chance to own part of the machine. It would also force the machine into greater visibility. Attempts involving New York and London became entangled in political, regulatory, and supply chain concerns. By July 2026, Shein had secured important Chinese and Hong Kong exchange approvals toward a possible Hong Kong listing, according to regulatory notices and reporting. But approval was not the same as a completed debut, and reported valuation expectations, up to roughly $50 billion, were far below the approximately $100 billion private valuation Shein reached during the market frenzy of 2022. That is not a collapse, but it is a repricing. Investors were being asked to value not only Shein's growth, they had to value its dependencies: customs rules, supplier conduct, product safety, intellectual property, environmental pressure, geopolitical tension, and an algorithm regulators were beginning to examine. The same hidden systems that made the company astonishingly efficient had become impossible to ignore. By 2024, Shein's Singapore registered operating entity reported approximately $37 billion in revenue and about $1.3 billion in profit before tax. Those figures placed it among the largest fashion businesses on earth. So who won? Consumers won access to an enormous selection of inexpensive products. Influencers gained content and sponsorship opportunities. Suppliers gained orders and access to a global platform. Shein's founders and early investors built one of the defining retail companies of the digital era. But the gains were not evenly distributed. Traditional retailers were forced to compete with an opponent carrying fewer stores, testing products faster, and learning from customers continuously. Independent artists faced the burden of monitoring an ocean of new listings. Factory workers could face the human pressure created by production speed, according to investigations. Governments struggled to inspect an avalanche of individual packages, and the environmental costs remained difficult to reconcile with the sheer volume of new products being promoted. Shein argues that its small batch model reduces unsold inventory compared with traditional mass production. It has announced emissions reduction targets and supply chain programs. Those efforts matter, but waste is only one part of fashion's impact. Materials must be manufactured. Garments must be dyed and assembled. Products must often travel long distances by air. Returns must be processed, and cheap clothing can make replacement feel easier than repair. A more efficient production system does not automatically create a sustainable consumption system. That distinction may define Shein's future. The larger impact is already visible. Fashion retailers now study online behavior more aggressively. They shorten production cycles. They use artificial intelligence to forecast demand. They personalize storefronts. They recruit creators instead of relying only on traditional advertising. They treat inventory decisions as constant experiments. Shein did not merely sell cheaper fast fashion. It changed what competitors believed was technologically possible. But then Temu arrived with a similar language of low prices, gamification, direct shipping, and relentless advertising. Suddenly, Shein was no longer only the disruptor. It was being disrupted by a platform willing to apply comparable tactics across an even wider range of products. The cycle had accelerated again, and that reveals the brutal nature of an advantage built on speed. Speed is powerful, but it is difficult to own. Competitors can become faster, advertising becomes more expensive, governments change customs rules, consumers lose trust, factories reach their limits. Eventually, the system must compete on something more durable. Shein solved one of retail's oldest problems. It found a better way to discover what customers wanted before producing enormous quantities. That innovation is real, it is valuable, and it will outlive the company, whether Shein ultimately dominates or declines. But the system also revealed a more uncomfortable truth. When a business becomes extraordinarily good at removing friction, it removes the moments when people normally stop and think. The price feels too small to question. The production happens too far away to see. The package passes too quickly to inspect. The feed refreshes too rapidly to leave. Shein's future will not be decided only by whether it can predict the next trend. It will be decided by whether the true cost of that trend finally catches up with the price on the screen. Every week, we uncover the hidden strategies, decisions, and controversies behind the world's most powerful companies. Subscribe and discover how business empires are really built.